Veteran suicide may be a national problem, but it has a local solution, and that local solution is you.
Welcome to the Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Headspace and Timing, a show dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes of veteran mental health. I'm your host, Dwayne France. Let's get ready to make sure that your headspace and timing is set correctly. Hey everybody, welcome to Headspace and Timing. If this is your first time listening, then thanks for checking us out. As many of you who serve know, the M2 machine gun, the 50 cal, is one of the greatest weapons in the military's arsenal. If the weapon's headspace and timing isn't set right, however, it's just a huge chunk of metal. Veterans can be rendered inoperable if their headspace and timing's not set correctly either. That's my mission here, to raise awareness about veteran mental health and reduce the stigma against seeking support. Each week we'll talk about different aspects of veteran mental health and interview mental health professionals that are working with veterans, service members, and their families around the country. Hey everybody, welcome back to Headspace and Timing, a show about changing the way that we think about veteran mental health. This is episode 17, and it's going to be Veterans Counseling Veterans with Thelma Williams. I think you guys will really enjoy this episode, as Tony, like me, is a combat veteran and a clinical mental health counselor. So I'm not the unicorn that people think I am. There are veterans who are in the mental health counseling field. So Tony is a retired Army combat veteran. He served on active duty in the Army for over 24 years, 8 enlisted and 16 commissioned, so that was a transition we'll definitely get into, including service during Desert Storm, Iraqi freedom, and Enduring Freedom. Received numerous military awards, including a Bronze Star, 3 MSMs. He retired in 2007, and he still wanted to continue to serve his fellow veterans, so he rebranded himself, getting a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Troy University. Upon graduation, he founded and is the current president CEO for Veterans Counseling Veterans Incorporated. Tony is married to Mrs. Thelma Williams, a retired police detective from Plainfield, New Jersey. And Tony has received numerous mental health counseling awards, including a 2014 National Award Social Service from the American Mental Health Counseling Association, and won the Florida Mental Health Counselor Association 2015 Poster Awards. You've got a lot of stuff on your website. I'm going to make sure that we link to that in the show notes. But Tony, welcome.
Hey, welcome. How you doing, Dwayne? Good to finally be on your show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It just in your bio, stuff that I didn't know, and obviously you and I have talked in the past, but my beautiful bride left a career in law enforcement to be an Army spouse. She was a Knox County Sheriff's deputy. So it seems like we have more in common than we thought.
Sure does.
So that's a lot of stuff there, Tony. I'd first like to get into maybe your military career, kind of when you joined. If you could just like big hand little map on what you did in the military.
Yeah, first of all, I want to just edit a little bit in the fact that I'm also a military brat. My dad was in the military for 20 years. So basically, if you add all the numbers up, I was of my 45 years I've been in a military environment. I kind of took the harder route than the normal route. I actually dropped out of high school at the age of 17, as my dad decided he wanted to, when he decided to retire, he wanted to retire to a place called Wilmington, Delaware. And that was really the first transition, if you will, that point in my life. Because I was so used to being in the military all my life, I just couldn't see myself in that environment that my dad wanted me to be in. So I actually joined the military because of that. I did not want to be in that, going to high school. It was totally different. Everything was so different when I went there. And so I went with my sister. She's older than me. She went to the recruiter, and I said, let me tag along with her on a Monday. And by Friday, I was on my way to Fort Leonard, Missouri, Echo 333, and so that's kind of how my introduction to the military went.
Yeah, they got you. When was that?
1979, August 29, 1979. I joined the military as a high school dropout, and at that time you could do that because your mother could sign a waiver.
Right.
And she did that. So that was my first introduction to the military, and my first big change. And one of the things, and you and I know about this, Dwayne, a lot, is that one of the things that they do in the military, they push you to always to improve yourself, always. And that's what happened to me. My Sergeant Stillwell, so I remember him. He said, "Tony, you gotta get your GED," and I did. I got my GED, and then after that, for an enlisted person, as you know, to gain the motion points, it's one of the ways you do it is by education.
Right.
And so I did a lot of education, not because I thought I was going to pursue a degree, but really just to my point was just to try to be competitive for promotion. And doing that, I got a year of college. I got my GED, I got a year of college, and then I happened to notice that there was and this is just an interesting story as well. I was going to NBT school up in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I was an E5 at the time. And I had a big fight with the second lieutenant, and he just pretty much told me, "Shut up." And I says, what makes you give the authority over me? And he says, "Because I got a degree." And that's really what started it. So I was in the Army Times. I looked at Army Times. This is all God stuff, these sequences. I looked at Army Times, and I saw an article saying, active duty scholarship, 2 years and 3 years scholarship, apply now. And that's what I did. I applied for a 3-year scholarship. I won it. Then it's one of those one thing I just made E6 at the same time. I made E6. I came on the E6 list. And so I decided then let me finish it up. So that's what I did. I went to Temple University on a 3-year ROTC scholarship. I got assessed as a military intelligence officer, and I finished up 16 years of my career for that. So that's kind of how
you made that shift, and that's actually pretty interesting. I had the opportunity when I was in Bosnia in the '96. I had actually put in for a green to gold, the same thing, the scholarship, and I was actually accepted to Tuskegee University for a 4-year ride because I didn't have any college at that time. And my NCO was basically, because for me it was get out and go to school, become an officer, and come back in, or stay in and make my E5 because I'd made points. I just didn't have time. All I had to do was re-enlist, and it was there. So for me, when you talk about those decision points or those transition points, in my Terrence Houston, I'll still remember, like you remember your NCO. They basically asked me, what did I want to go to school for? Because we think about what is the reason, right? A lot of people think that it's the goal, but it's just a means to the goal. It's just means to an end. And I said that I wanted to be a teacher, like a high school teacher or something. And that's what he told me an NCO is, right? A non-commissioned officer is a teacher, and that's what he does. And so ultimately at that point, I decided to stay on that side as opposed to you making the transition the way you did to the officer corps. Now, how was that for you? You had gotten out, I assume, or so you were out for a couple years and then came back in as an officer.
Well, yeah, and basically the way they try to do it is they put me in active reserve. So
right.
I wasn't out, right? But I was out, okay? Because they could still pull me in if I failed or whatever like that. They can still pull me back in. So I was out, but I was out because I was going to school. That was the only reason why I was out. Wasn't out to be out.
Right.
And so it was a huge transition for me for a lot of reasons. I wrote an article about that, but I had, I call it the board, or the collective board. Well, for all those years, I always thought collectively. And now all of a sudden, going to school and stuff, I had to think as an individual. And that was a difficult transition. And then the culture is different. I went to school, I was older, I was like 27. So that's the first thing. I was older than most people going to school. And the people who were in ROTC, they, except for one guy, they all were never been in the military. So right. I had more in common with the instructors than I did with the actual classmates.
And so
that was a difficult transition.
This was in the 80s, like late 80s or mid to late 80s, right? So this
yes,
wasn't
86, 89.
So, maybe you might have had some, some Vietnam veterans, but, this was, you served in sort of the height of the Cold War Army,
Okay.
and not a lot of combat veterans. And that's what I call that blank space in between Vietnam and then the Gulf War, and another blank between Gulf and 9/11. But even that was, it wasn't a military, it wasn't a country at war at that time. So even the fellow cadets didn't see it as what, say, post 9/11 people would see it now.
Oh, absolutely, and we'll talk about that later on too. But that's one of the things too, is that I came in through the Cold War, so obviously everything was totally different. Mentality, everything was different. And you're a reservist, really. You're a reserve, and the duty was really like an extra pay. It wasn't really like you're really in the military. You just kind of met for the weekend, had some barbecues, and got to collect the check that covered your car note or something. So everything was different when I was going through at that time.
So then you came back active duty as a military intelligence officer. So that was late '80s. So you had served in the Gulf War, and then those post-Gulf years. And then ended up in the early years of 9/11. I wonder what that was like, being a veteran of the Gulf War versus maybe your experiences in the global war on terror.
The interesting part is that when this happened, and I've done the Hohenfeld thing, so I was an OC, matter of fact, at the Hohenfelds. So that helped prepare me as far as the war kind of mentality, because I was an OC.
Because you were in Hohenfels. Because Hohenfels is a combat zone.
It's a combat training environment. So we were always, and I was there for like almost a year and a half, just doing that OC stuff for the scouts and the GSRs. GSRs was my platoon. So because of that, I have already been trained in the military aspect, and then it came to be, I guess almost a way of helping me out, because what happened when the 9/11 happened, I was actually doing one of my R's. So when you're an officer and you're a captain, once you finish command, you have to do one of the 3 R's, either reserve, ROTC, or recruiting. And I chose reserve, which meant I was going to go and train the reservists in National Guard and military intelligence.
So you were an active component attached to the the reserves. I had when I was at Fort Meade, I had a neighbor who had gone from the Ranger Regiment, and he was an enlisted advisor for a reserve unit, and spun his head around.
Yes, exactly. I was with first Army Division, which was at the time it was in Atlanta. That was my actual duty station, but I was assigned at Fort Dix, and like you said, you're the active duty component. Your job is to try to help train the reservists, National Guard on their active duty operations. So that was another kind of transition, and that is that you have the reserve, and they're trying to teach. It's funny, as you're trying to teach them, they're trying to teach you. Like, don't be so critical, or
Yeah,
so,
right.
Why are you so hard, So yeah, that's what I was happening doing. That's what I was doing during the time of the 9/11 at that time. Training reserve, National Guard.
So then your deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, you had one each?
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't deploy to Afghanistan, so I hated that. When I was writing the bio, it's kind of thing I was there, but I wasn't there. So the OIF is when I actually deploy, and then the Afghanistan, I was actually in a support role back in the States, in CONUS.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the one in Iraq, that was different because I was actually in a special operation, which I really can't talk too much more about. But
sure.
I was an 04, and they saw all my experiences, so I was actually selected by Fort Belvoir. I don't know how much familiar with Fort Belvoir.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I spent 3 years in the military district of Washington, so definitely if you're tagged by anybody inside or close to the Beltway, it's definitely a different kind of mission, kind of situation.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
So you left the military, and so that was a really long time. Did you consider, did you intend on becoming a mental health counselor upon leaving when you retired?
No way. So that's another, all these transition points.
Right.
And sometimes it's just serendipity. So when I retired, and I met my wife just before I retired, and she was still an active police officer in Plainfield, New Jersey. And she was in charge of the domestic violence unit in Plainfield. And I wanted to have something, her and I having something in common. So their unit had a civilian team that was called response team, domestic violence response team, that you can go and you're like the first person they meet, and basically your job is to show them the resources and that kind of stuff. Well, that's what got me, because then at the time they always told me, you're not a counselor, you're just like a point man. You don't counsel people.
Right. And
at that time, and I don't know how you were when you got out, but my mind was always focused on everything I thought was about military. And I said, well, you know what? I now see how I can use my 9/11 GI Bill by getting a degree in counseling, and then and then I didn't think about at the nonprofit at the time, but that's what the point that I decided I wanted to go into mental health counseling, not because I want to do mental health, but I wanted to find a way that I could still continue to help the soldiers, and I thought that would be a good way of helping the soldiers still.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, and especially you being enlisted before and then moving to be an officer. It's one thing that I've always said is, when I was in the Army, the NCO creed, they accomplished my mission and the welfare of my soldiers. And here you and I are carrying out the mission is now the welfare of the veterans that we serve. And so It's really combining those two leadership pieces. But it's interesting to me that wasn't a consideration for you. What did you intend on doing when you got out? What did you think your career, quote unquote, was going to be?
Well, so when I got out, I was military intelligence. I had top secret clearance. I had all these things everybody said everybody wants, but I didn't enjoy doing that in the military. And I thought when I got out, this is the opportunity, especially being on 04, that I can actually do what I want to do. And I thought at that time, like you, I thought I want to be a teacher. And then to do teaching, you had a certificate, whatever. So I was a substitute teacher, and I had a terrible time teaching these little bad kids. It was interesting. I mean, they really got me. I was like the fourth or fifth graders, and they really pulled the wool over my eyes, about what was going on. So I got, I said, okay, no problems. When I found out the truth, I had the whole class in a front leaning rest position.
That was the.
And they went and told the old principal, and the principal came to me and said, "Oh my gosh, sir, you can't do that."
Well, obviously I can because I just did. Now, if I shouldn't,
Yep. So so because then that's how I was still substitute teaching a little bit, and then when I did my wife thing, then I said, okay, counseling, because I wanted to find a way to use my GI Bill, and I got a bachelor's in business. I could have got an MBA. But I really wasn't. That didn't affect me spiritually when I thought about it. It was like, when I read the brochure about the counseling part, is what I said. This is what I want to do right here. I didn't know about the other stuff I'm doing now. I just knew that this is something I know because my dad was in the military. My dad was an alcoholic. He was a drill sergeant, matter of fact. My dad was a drill sergeant, and everybody in his drill team were alcoholics. They were in great shape, but they had terrible marriages, and they were alcoholics.
Yeah. And
I never drank. The way I dealt with it, I did the other side of the pendulum. I never drank. Until this day, I'm 55. I never drank. So I saw that it made a lot more sense that I did the mental health side and still help the veteran and their family. That's another thing I wanted to be able to do, was to be able to still and help the family as well, not just the veteran, but the family too. So that's what got me kind of drifting toward the mental health side of the house.
And that's a big thing, and you pointed out, you mentioned serendipity, and that's something obviously that I've learned, just being in the right place at the right time, and veterans keeping their minds open for these other alternatives. Some of my fellow guests or fellow hosts on the network talk a lot about that. Is if you think that you need to get out and be a contractor, if you think that's what you need to do, then that's what you're going to do because you've got that locked in your head. I really like the example that you have of, well, I'm just going to be open to whatever, and the whatever is whatever comes along. And it sounds like you went through like 3 different potential careers before you landed on doing what you've been doing for, really the last 10 years.
Yeah. It's one of the things about the military, is about adaptability. Being able to adapt is key. And I told people they don't listen to me too much, but I tell them, before you decide what you want to do, you need to take a year off. Because you first of all got to learn how to be you. And you don't know what you like and don't like. So you really need about a year before you start making decisions about what you're going to do next. But, the financial parts, all that kind of stuff makes it difficult for you to make those kind of pauses. But I really would think that as a mental, especially if you're in a career like you and I, you need about a year just to try to get a chance to know who you are again.
No, I think
and your family.
No, I think that's accurate. And just in my experience, I started out as a program director in a nonprofit. I did that for about 18 months. And you're right, it was about a year into it where for me it was much more like social work, sort of that case management. It sounded like maybe a little bit what you were, resource kind of thing that you were doing with your wife's unit. That really wasn't satisfying to me, and that's what you're talking about. It didn't sit right with you spiritually. It didn't sit right with me. And I was there for 18 months before I decided, you know what, this really isn't what I want to do. This isn't something that's fulfilling to me. And so that's some great advice, too, is if it's possible to really take that time. The other thing, though, I hear you saying, Tony, is don't get so locked into what you do when you first come out, because that may not be what you're going to stay doing.
Yes, yeah. It's very difficult because then you have the whole joke. We always said that, what am I going to do now that I'm grown up?
Yeah,
that's kind of how it is when you get out of the military, especially if you've done it as long as we have. You're almost like starting over again. And just like when you were a kid and when you become an adult, you have to peel the onion. All those things that you are really not who you are, but who your parents want you to be in the environment. And you have to now take the time to find out who you are. And that takes time. And it doesn't happen naturally. It takes effort. So,
right.
Go ahead.
No, and you're right. I think that's a good point too. It's because if you just kind of wait for it to happen, it's probably not going to happen. If
No.
You stand on the street corner and just wait for something to get handed to you. I mean, and I think a lot of veterans think they know this or understand, but
right.
It's really beneficial to hear it coming from you. And of course, I feel the same way. So you get out and then you become a mental health counselor. So you've been doing this for about 10 years. How was it when you first?
No, actually, I'm going on my third year.
Oh, okay. So you started in 2007.
2007 is that, and I know we're fast forwarding. It's that kind of the waiting round. I did that part. I could afford to do that. Others couldn't because my wife is already a professional and I'm retired with a major's pay. So I had the opportunity to actually sit around and kind of really get to sit. You know what I mean? Other people don't have that. They got house bills and kids going to college. So as soon as they retire from the military, they go right to a contracting job.
Right.
There's no pause space. I had the opportunity to pause. So I didn't pursue my degree until I think 2009 or 10. 2010 maybe.
Okay. And so you're you're in Tampa, I believe, right?
Yes, Tampa.
And so what's the climate like for veteran mental health there in Florida?
So again, like I've always been focused on the veterans and stuff. So I actually interned at James A. Haley VA here in Tampa.
Okay.
And so I got that kind of experience also to help shape my comments. And what I saw, Dwayne, is that I was in a suicide prevention team, and at that time it was one of the best suicide prevention teams in the VA. And I was part of that team. And what I saw, Dwayne, was a lot of people who worked there were just there for the paycheck, and there were very few veterans in mental health counselors, and that's still true today. I think it's 10%, but the psychologists and the mental health counselors, licensed mental health counselors, are in the double digits. Like I think psychologists 10, and we're like number 8, and the rest is in 2 and 3%. So my experience helped me think, you know what, we need to be doing it. We as veterans need to be doing it because the empathy, and I hate to sit there and paint a big brush because there are definitely people in the VA who care about veterans, and I definitely give a shout out to Carol. And the chief mental health name is Dr. Gwen Conlano, those guys really cared. But
Right.
the bulk of them, when they had a hard case to do with a veteran cursing and yelling and stuff, they gave them to me. And I was a graduate.
They said you can't hurt and you could possibly help, so here you go.
And I did, I think it's that relationship. I mean, where I worked at was, all the guys who were Baker Act, they were on this ward, and we would go out there and assess them, and they would not talk to anybody, and then I would go there and they would talk to me about everything. So they saw that I was effective, and not because I don't think it's because of as much as Tony as much as the fact that I had something relatable. And those guys and I hate to sound like I'm painting the brush, but they had PhDs and that kind of stuff. So when they hear a curse word, they're already stopping. They're already uninvited. And to me, it's like, and I'll keep it going. They don't like that. Because they're PhD psychologists, and they got their mind is angry veterans cursing at them, and of course the veterans like, you don't know, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I was on the phone one time with a guy, and he was, and my supervisor had him. He was yelling, cursing. And they told me, here, Tony, talk to him. I'm like, okay. I talked to them, man. I tell you, about another hour or two, we were like best buds.
Cursing and all.
Yeah, but I filtered that. That was filtered out. That doesn't mean anything to me. That's not how I value people and judge them, So I think that's when I sit there and say, we have to be, why can't we do this? We as veterans who are counselors, why can't we do this? And that's where the thought of creating a nonprofit came in right then.
Well, and I'm with you, and I know that some of the recent discussions that we had on LinkedIn and on Facebook, where we're connected, and how we got connected before is, I'm not anti-VA, and you said you're not anti-VA,
Nope.
But those of us who are on the outside have the ability to speak truth to power, and
yes,
to be
absolutely.
able to. If the emperor ain't got no clothes, then the emperor ain't got no clothes.
Right.
I have. We just presented at our monthly summit, mental health summit, annual mental health summit this past week. When we're recording this, and I have some very, very respected colleagues that are very, very skilled, as you said. However, there's also limits and restrictions, and there's things that the VA can't do that I think that community providers can do, that you and I can do. Some of that being more flexible and being more open and being able to respond quicker to maybe some veterans' needs. So I'm firmly with you on that there needs to be both a community support element as well as a place for the VA. Now, yes. You mentioned, though, that more of us should do that, that we can do that. I just don't know that there's that many of us veterans who are also mental health counselors to be able to make that shift.
Yeah, I think that's why I see very few. Because Dwayne, first of all, demographically, the majority of the counselors are women.
True.
And demographically, the majority of counselors are not military. I mean, they're the ones that was probably throwing and spitting at the Vietnam veterans because they really have this different mentality of us. And most of the time, what you find out is that people who are counselors are not the soldiers or servicemen, but it's their spouse that are actually doing that field, like
True.
the teachers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also that part where, especially like we're more. The military rewards cognitive thinkers, right? If I can't be an officer, I cannot be a lieutenant, captain, sergeant, whatever, and have feelings. I got to sit there and take that hill, and if 80 of you guys die, well, then 80 of you guys die. That's the price you pay. That's a cognitive thought process, not a touchy-feely like I don't want you. And I think that what the skill set that we learn and all that kind of stuff does not really set us up for being a counselor, because a counselor involves you being more empathetic and thinking more of the individual and not of the collective.
I think that's a really great point. I think of these. Remember these kids' toys? You squeeze the ball and it goes up to the top end or the bottom end. The military does squeeze in many senses, almost literally. squeeze the emotion out of you and kind of push everything up into your head and cognitively. I like how you said that. Very much, and that was going back to what I said before about the accomplishment of the mission and the welfare of the soldier. There were many times where I was told very clearly that if I had to choose between the two, it was the mission. And Absolutely. And some people had a struggle with that, but yes, it is very much more on the logic side. Not that there aren't emotional people, because a lot of times that would come out in different ways. The screamers and the yellers and the anger. Really, I mean, the anger was primarily the one emotion that was acceptable, almost. Unless for those brief moments where you had a memorial ceremony, which you could allow a silent tear to roll. Beyond that, that was pretty much it. So I really like how you identified that's what the Army did, or the military did, was push all of the effort into cognitive and logic rather than emotion and heart.
Yeah, and I want to take it one little step further, in that there's a role for the enlisted and a role for the officer. Now, I consider myself bilingual, right? Because I speak both enlisted and commissioned.
Right.
And so it's more of the NCO's job to take care of the soldiers than it is me as commissioned officer. And I got into a lot, and because that was a struggle for me, because when I was in those meetings with all the officers and stuff, I still was an NCO. And I got some battles there, we got,
a sheep in wolf's clothing.
Oh my gosh, I got into fights. And the people outside didn't know that. They just thought all of a sudden they see we're doing something that doesn't make sense, and Tony, why didn't you fight for it? Man, I almost got fired trying to fight for you guys, to try to do it that you can take care of both. And so that's another thing. As counselors, we have to sit there and understand the nuances of a soldier or a sailor or whatever, from the enlisted part to when they're junior enlisted to when all those things have different, like a biopsychosocial that we are intuitively know about when somebody comes and talks to us.
Right.
So an E4, who may be single, may have a whole different biopsychosocial stressors than an E8 who's in first sergeant or whatever. And I got to appreciate that, saying, hey, and I think as a counselor, people like you and I will sit there and see somebody and they tell me that they're a first sergeant, whatever. I say, oh, okay, I know where I'm coming from, and not sit there and say, first sergeant, are you higher than a general? And, that just turns a lot of people off when you talk like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I do. It goes beyond cultural competence, and it actually goes into really understanding. You and I natively understand the military, whereas and you spent time in Germany. I spent time in Germany, and we could have learned German. We could have learned the German culture. We could learn German history. We could maybe speak it as well or understand it almost as well, but we would still have that one gap left where we couldn't make it into a native speaker, right? We still wouldn't be a true native individual. And I think that many people can put the effort to get there, but for me, what I say is when we talk about military cultural competence, let's get past the describing what HUA means, right? Let's get past... let's get to the real stuff, like you're talking about, the real difference between, a single E4 in the barracks and a married, command master chief, who doesn't know his kids, right? Those are two totally different aspects where somebody would say military.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's, I think, the effort that you're trying to do is really to gather around a lot of the mental health providers who are veterans, and we're part of a group that you've created to really try to get that together. And again, that's the main point of this podcast, is not just to talk to veterans about, hey, you can actually reach out to mental health, but also a source for providers to say, look, there's more than just, the difference between a corporal and a specialist. There's... calling a Marine is sort of like skill level 1 tasks, where we really need to make sure that counselors are up to their, higher level tasks.
Yes. Yeah. One thing I want to also, Dwayne, is that, and I always say this, that the military don't put the same kind of effort when they make us into the military than we get out. And for example, in the military, what they do is it's like when you wax floor, and they strip you of your whole identity, and then they coach you with the collective identity, and that talks about AIT and whatever your primary MOS is. And we don't do the same thing when we get out. We don't sit there and then all of a sudden put in strip away the individual, and then the collective part, and put the individual, and there's no AIT on the other side. So what I want to try to do with mental health counselors who are veterans is create an AIT on the other side. That you decide, and what I do with my nonprofit veterans council veterans, if you're somebody who just comes out and you're going to get a degree in counseling, it's like counseling college or whatever, I will assign you, and you get with us, we'll assign you a mentor, and then we will help you navigate, because like you're a network, and a lot of these guys aren't networked, but we'll help you with that. I think we need to do the same thing if we're really serious about helping these guys transition, women and guys transition, is taking the same kind of energy you use and making them into soldiers or sailors or airmen, and making them on the other side AIT, and helping them out with their careers. And it's not everybody wants to be a construction worker, and that's what I see most of when I look at these job fairs. I see a lot of construction jobs. I'm like, wait a minute, what if I want to be a skill? What if I want to do like we're doing? Where's that at?
And you make an excellent point. Obviously, depending on how long you're in basic training, or OBC if you're an officer, look at West Point or any of the service academies, spending as much time as they do to create future officers, that they don't do that on the outside. And I say it's hard to change the machine once you're in the machine, but once I started learning psychology and mental health, I looked back and realized that I was a participant in the greatest Pavlovian experiment ever called airborne school. Right. Airborne school, it's 2 weeks of throwing yourself against the ground, so all you do when that green light comes on is what the Army wants you to do, which is jump out the airplane.
Just get out the airplane.
Yeah, totally against all of our, there's two ingrained fears when we're born, fear of loud noises and fear of falling. And so totally against someone's nature to jump out of an airplane, but that's what the Army did for me back in the late 90s was get me to think it was my idea. I'm the one that raised my hand for it, and so that's a lot of it, is to suppress the fear and to suppress the concerns, and just so it becomes automatic. And so the Army invests so much time so that we run towards the sound of the battle, or we volunteer for not just dangerous assignments, but just moving our families around and just life disruption. But we love it because that's the culture that we're thinking. But then yes, the Army does not give us the same amount of time or the same amount of effort in retraining ourselves to prepare for the civilian world.
Right. Yep.
The idea, though, of and I that I bang this gong, is that when we're talking about transition, that nobody seems to want to talk about veteran mental health in context of that transition. This is a lot of the reason why my co-host Eddie and Bennett brought me on the show, is that they know that they're talking about networking, they're talking about entrepreneurship, they're talking about how to, write your resume and things like that. But they recognize that there's a huge aspect of veteran mental health that is not addressed in many transition, and that's how to set our mental health, how to get that shift.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
How do we get there?
Well, I think the problem is, like we just said, the majority of people who are decision makers, like, when we go for promotion, the people who are on the promotion board are mostly combat armed guys and who have combat patches. And those are the same people who are making decisions about transition. And what did I just say? Majority of us learn the cognitive. So that's not even part of their little lexicon. That's one of the problems. The people who are making these decisions they don't think like that. And so that's DOD. And no one holds DOD accountable. They hold the VA accountable, but no one holds DOD accountable. They got the biggest silos, and they're still there. The silo's still there in DOD.
No, I agree, and this was one thing. Again, as we're recording this, we had our VA mental health summit, and we the panel addressed the opioid crisis, and part of my emphasis to them was that if you want to talk opioid crisis, you need to get DOD in the room because that's where it starts.
Exactly. All of it. You know what, Dwayne? 90% of the stuff that started there, started in the DOD. And it's like the VA is trying to handle this military sexual trauma. Well, if it's not identified when they're on active duty, how the heck are you going to sit there and identify afterwards?
Right.
And so and then your jumper, you and I are airborne jumpers. Well, a lot of us who were jumpers, the military told you don't complain. If you want to be successful, stop complaining. Don't go to sick call.
Knees and back, and I had surgery on my hand. I had carpal tunnel, which was first identified when I was in jump master school in '99, and had surgery on it in 2013. Of course, because right before we get out, they say that's when you're supposed to get 20 years of care. And the doctor brought in students to stare at my hand. And they were like, "This is what happens when you ignore this injury for 20-something years." And because that's what we do, and it's a collective suck it up and drive on. Until it gets to the point where there are physical and emotional, spiritual, moral injuries. So how are you addressing that with the veterans that you see? Talk to me a little bit about Veterans Counseling Veterans.
So one of the things about the Veterans Counseling Veterans, and I got the acronym TEAMS because we love acronyms in the military, and we have the training, the education, advocacy, the mentorship, and then the service. And so if you're somebody who's a student or whatever intern, we help you to go through that transition as well as the academic part of the schooling. If you're a client, and a lot of the clients come through referrals, and what we'll do is we'll try to match you up with somebody who best match up with you. So in other words, if you're a spouse or a dependent, then we'll look around in our area like a resource, like we were talking about the social work part, and who's military, and we'll say, here's somebody here, you can see them. If you're combat, then we'll try to match up with a combat person. And then we're not that big yet to be able to sit there and do too many things, like we got the Air Force, Marines, all that kind of stuff. So we try to sit there and do a intake and try to match you up with the best as possible, somebody who's like you or close to being like who you are. And one of the problems I have with the Veteran Treatment Court is that when you make a decision, most of us who get out of the military, it also includes your family. And that's the same thing with Veteran Treatment Court, whatever. And while the veteran's getting treatment, no one's treating the family. And if the family's not being treated, then you're really not helping out the veteran. And that was not really accepted in the Veteran Treatment Court. I would say, well, refer the family to us so we can help them out on the other end, and so they can help. So that's what we try to do. Is we also try to hit both ends. If I got a guy come in or a woman come in, and she's a veteran, but she got a family who also dealing with stuff, then we hit both of them. We hit the family and we hit the veteran.
And I think that's something that is very much overlooked, and I see the same thing too, which is how we sort of independently or similarly came up with the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency, is that the veteran who gets out, maybe he's a staff sergeant, did 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, he had 8 years, and he decided to hang it up. No medical discharge or whatever. At least he has the VA. Now, his wife, who's been with him through all of those, and the kids who have not been with him or, have been, maybe they've been through a couple of them, they have zero resources. There's no more military one source for veterans. There's no more TMC. There's no more health care. Thankfully, you and I have, we've retired. We made it to that point, maybe scratching and clawing, but we got there. And so we have the resources of TRICARE and my kids are still teenagers and, hey, getting to the doctor tomorrow, right? We still have those resources. But those young. I had a staff sergeant who deployed 4 times in his 10 years, and he tapped it out, and he said, "I can't do it. It's already spent one marriage. I can't make it spend the other marriage."
Yes, absolutely.
And he was like, I have to be done, because he did 20 years of service in 10 years, and his family doesn't have the resources that maybe yours and mine do. And so that is a vastly overlooked aspect of mental health. I call it still veteran mental health, because the spouses serve too.
Yes, they do. Yep. And I tell you, and Dwayne, and I have a personal aspect, because remember, I was a military brat.
Right.
And I used to always say, it's like, I look at us being like a plug and play. That unlike a computer, before we put something into the computer, it always says, hold up, wait up, hold up, okay, now it's safe. And then when we take it out, okay, now it's safe, take it out. We don't do that with the kids. The kids is just yank them and put them into your plug and play. And that affects our growth and the way we interact and how we socialize. And no one looks at that saying, wait a minute, how's that affecting his children or her children? With the different aspects, and how they're helping in interaction. No one's doing that.
Yeah,
so that's what I want to try to figure out.
They call, everybody talks about Army brats, but it's really an ungrounded culture, right? They don't have any place that they're from. I've told this before, but my son, who's just turned 16, he and I were having a conversation, just driving down the road or whatever, and the thought popped into my head, and I said, if someone were to ask you, where are you from, what would you say? Now, my wife and I, of course, she'd say she's from Knoxville. I grew up in St. Louis. I could say that I'm from somewhere. I can go point to my childhood home. And he was like, well, I was born in Germany, but I don't remember that, because they left when they were like 18 months and 2 years old. Then he was like, and we spent time in Maryland, but I don't remember that either. And I grew up mostly in Colorado, but I'm not from Colorado. So he's like, I really don't know. And I think that's very indicative of, and that's just, and that's my kids, and my wife and I have been very, focused on making sure their development and giving them as much as they can. But I think that's indicative of many military children.
Yes. Yep. People always ask me where you're from. I says everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Right, and you live that, right? And again, this is, our similarities are uncanny, Tony. But my father served in Vietnam, but he wasn't a career man. He was out of the Army before I left. Although I saw the residuals of it for 25, 30 years. But yeah, you lived that ungrounded, unmoored kind of aspect, in that the military became going back home for you, I'd imagine.
Yes, it was like going, and I tell you, I'm gonna put a different spin on it. I'm African American.
Right.
It's a whole nother aspect of it that I had absolutely no connection or relationship to the African American community.
Yeah.
And so that's something that when you're a military brat, or when you got in the military, all of a sudden now you're back to something you have no idea how to deal with. I'm a military guy.
Yeah,
so,
and it's not just a lack of connection geographically, but socially, definitely, and even racially, almost.
Yep. It's different, just different. So I'm more comfortable. So it's interesting, again, so as a counselor, I'm saying those things you would overlook unless you had that kind of experience. Something. Oh, wait a minute, this guy here, maybe he or she is dealing with this kind of stressor as well.
Right, and I think that's a very much overlooked aspect for people that aren't familiar with military service is how, and I'm not even going to say colorblind we are, because Lord knows, Tony, I know that's not the case. But we're much more culturally diverse. We're much more globally minded and culturally diversified minded. My first roommate we were first two duty stations, and he was a kid from Hilo, Hawaii, and no kid growing up in St. Louis would ever know anybody even from Hilo, Hawaii. And the same thing, he was like, but we were best of friends. Airborne, went to 82nd together, and jumped out of airplanes together, and those kind of things, and that's not normal. That's not in normal American existence. People that never leave their county or never leave their state, to have interacted with veterans that have been in more in more countries than most people have been in towns.
Yes, and I like you. I grew up in the military as a kid and as an adult, so I literally say my best friend is this. I'm not BSing. I mean, he's my best friend, or I've been to their house and in my house. That's the kind of life we grew up in. And if you're in a military brat, or if you're in the military, generally speaking, people just look at your rank, whatever, and that's about it. And then you come out to this world, to the real world, I guess, this side here, and so you got to deal with that as well, the transition of that. And you look around. That's why I joined the American Legion, and I'm comfortable with them, more than anybody else and anything else. So, yeah.
So, and I definitely want to be respectful of your time and start to wrap it up here. But I get a lot of veterans, especially now that like you are putting yourself out there and having these conversations. That the veterans say, you know what, you're not going to get me to see a shrink. Why do I need to work with a mental health counselor? What would you say to that veteran?
Well, and this is what, again, the one challenge we have, Dwayne, is that the veteran is always taught to look out for his buddy, right? No, we did jumping, and we always check out the guy in front of us.
Yep.
We never really checked out ourselves as much as the people behind us, checking that guy looking at my back.
Exactly.
Well, what I would do with them, and that's, I think we have to be more creative in our counseling, is try to get it in a more of a teamwork kind of mentality and not as an individual, and try to get somebody or someone they're concerned with as part of the whole. Because the thing about me being a nonprofit and all that kind of stuff, I can include a lot more people than if I was a VA or something. I tell them all that when they come to me, who's your one of your support mechanisms? Okay, I'm calling them. And I don't tell them exactly what's going on as far as, we still have our rules as far as confidentiality, but I make sure they're part of it. I let them know. If I can't find you, if you don't contact me, I'll contact her, or I'll contact him. And that you gotta try to get them away from, you gotta try the passive aggressive kind of stuff. And I try to, one of the things we have to do, I start with groups. So where I have here, we have groups. And football, that kind of. Start with something fun, football, hiking, whatever, and then you start it from there, and they'll start talking, and then you'll pull them aside and start dealing with the individual side again, because we're collective. So we got to do reverse. We got to start with the group to get to the individual, not the other way around.
It's what I love about this, Tony, is I always learn something new from each of my guests, and I think that's my big takeaway from you is we can't start from the individual and then go to the general. That we need to have the veteran be where they're comfortable, which is in that group around other veterans. And I have another guest, Timothy Weinecke. He's familiar with veterans in the education field. And he says that when he first comes in, because he's a professional counselor also, did a lot of work in higher education. And he said when veterans first come into college, they're going to start associating with the other veterans and grow the beard and wear the patches and stuff like that, which is perfectly fine. But then he said it's strange because you can almost see how the minute they decide to make that shift, that they shave the beard off, they get the haircut, and they put on a collared shirt, and it's usually towards the end of their sophomore, beginning of junior year, and then they find another tribe to connect with. Essentially, they want to work with other dentists, or they want to work with other visual artists or something. But they connect themselves to another group. But that's a really great idea, is to find brothers and sisters, connect with them, and through them get to the individual.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's great. So to wrap it up here, Tony, where can people find you? How can they get a hold of you? I know how to get a hold of you, but I want to make sure to let them know, and then we'll make sure we get it all in the show notes.
Well, we have my website, vets.org, www. That's my website. I also have a Facebook page, and the Facebook page, which is called Veterans Counseling Veterans, and that's mainly people who are involved in the mental health profession come together, and hopefully we share ideas and topics and stuff. Those are the two main ways that you can get a hold of me, either through my website, obviously, and I'm in Hillsborough, so I'm well known in Hillsborough, word of mouth. But Those are the best ways to get hold of me.
Well, and I think that's the big thing is you and I were sort of like scouts outside the gate, that pointing the way back, or maybe a torch in the wilderness or whatever. But that's what I want to try to do, is to be able to find mental health professionals, not necessarily veterans, as long as they understand what's going on. And if I know somebody in Tampa, if through my blog or through this podcast or something, somebody reaches out to me and they say they're in Florida and they're hurting, I send them to you, right? Or so to really build a nationwide network of culturally competent veteran mental health professionals. So definitely going to make sure that you're on the resource list, and make sure that everybody knows that you're out there.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Okay, any last thoughts, Tony?
And I just one thing I want to plug in. We talked about it on the internet, on the LinkedIn. I've created a coalition. I think, and that's another thing too. I've always learned about coalitions. I'm not about individual. And I've created a coalition called Veterans and Families Outreach Support for Suicide Survivors. So I want, hopefully that spreads everybody in the area, including yourself, create something similar, where we got it. The people, when a veteran dies by suicide, who's taking care of the family? They have to deal with that tragic event, and that's one of the things I want to push. And a matter of fact, I have a meeting tonight on that, and I'm also meeting another military program director for Living Works tomorrow to try to create a support mechanism for families. And most of these families are not even veterans. Most of them are just like non-veterans. And all of a sudden, after the person dies by suicide, they're thrust into the military culture, and they know nothing about it. So I want to create something that will help them out, which is what I have now. It's called VVOS. So that's why I want to also throw out to your listeners to start something like that. Is because veteran suicide may be a national problem, but it has a local solution, and that local solution is you.
I hope that's your tagline, Tony, because that was a pretty good one, and I'm going to make sure. I mean, and that is it. That gave me goosebumps right there. It may be a national problem, but it has a local solution. And that's what I tell people. I was speaking just the other day about it. Is I'm not going to solve 20 a day, 22 a day, whatever the number is, but just one, right? Just one. It has to be solved on an individual, face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball level. And I really like that. So I'm going to make sure that there's a link to that in the show notes, and we'll hopefully make a difference. Well, I appreciate you being on the show today, Tony.
Bob, thanks for inviting me, Dwayne. I'll see you on the other side.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to this episode of Headspace and Timing. I'd like to thank Eddie and Bennett of the Change Your POV podcast for their focus on the mental health and wellness of our nation's service members. You can support the Change Your POV podcast by heading over to our Patreon page located at www.changeyourpov.com/Patreon. I'd also like to thank my sponsor, the Family Care Center, private outpatient clinical mental health counseling agency in Colorado Springs, Colorado, as well as the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency, 501c3 nonprofit professionally affiliated with the Family Care Center. We specialize in the mental health and wellness of veterans and their families in the Colorado Springs area. You can find more information at both at www.fccsprings.com. You can find the show notes for this episode on both changeyourpov.com and Headspace and Timing blog at veteranmentalhealth.com. We recommend that you subscribe to the podcast using your favorite app or podcast player. Sign up for the blog updates at changeyourpov.com and veteranmentalhealth.com. That way you won't miss future episodes or blog posts. While I'm a mental health professional, I'm not your mental health professional, and neither are the guests on the show. The information presented here does not represent professional mental health advice. If you're in need of help, contact a crisis line, emergency room, treatment center, or consult with a qualified mental health care provider. We want you to be safe because you're important to us.